Welcome to the 12-Step Recovery Evolution podcast. Visit recoveryevolution.co.uk for more episodes, helpful resources and links to our social media. Also visit the site for information on how you can attend a future Zoom session or workshop live. Thank you.
Morning everyone. Happy Good Friday. It's a big day on the Christian calendar about forgiveness, so I think the title that we ended up with was landed perfectly. One of them coincidences that you come to get used to on this spiritual journey. But also like to start by saying sorry to Heidi and Cole. It's always the worst part about having a dog that when they die. But just for anyone who don't know, the spiritual significance of the word dog obviously is God backwards. And that's because when you put the word dog in a mirror, it obviously says God backwards. And the significance of that is that a dog is a reflection of God's unconditional love. And that's why they're our best friends. So we can learn a lot from our dogs, but very painful when they pass. So sorry about that. And so that brings us into about forgiveness. Now, I'm just going to go back to the big book. We're going to have a dig into there. Now, I want to do a disclaimer. I'm only learning about forgiveness. I wish I listened to this podcast myself 30 years ago. It's been something that I've learned more about as I've gone, and it's something that I don't think's talked about enough, forgiveness. And we get into that a little bit more because as we realised yesterday on the resentments, that it's saying that the resentment, it says on page 64 of the big book, it says resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. We have not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, and again, look, in circles that people want to get a little bit technical on the words, they say, look, you can't be spiritually sick. And I kind of agree with that, but what it's actually saying is that we're spiritually detached, that we're detached from the spirit, and that's what's making us ill mentally and physically. And so the solution that is putting forward is that we get this connection. So the spiritual malady is this separation from God through the spirit. And so it's saying we need to get that relationship back. But one of the number one thing that stops that is being resentful and having resentment, or holding offences, or even sins, other people's sins against us. And we know through like the Lord's Prayer, it talks us about forgiving of sins. Because the sin again is about the separation. So
some people say
if
sins rather than forgive us our trespasses.
Some say that, Lawrence, your mic's off. But but some Bibles are different. Some say sins, some say trespasses, some say debts, that we forgive us our debts, or forget people to get debts against us. It's anything that we're holding that's above zero. So if we're holding any debt or any offence against somebody else, then it's not going back to a zero. That unless we're completely satisfied with a debt, or satisfied with a sin or an offence, it means it's completely forgiven. So obviously, if I lend you money and you owe me £10 and you don't give me it back, then you always owe me £10. But if I say I forgive the debt, then you don't owe me anything. And so that kind of goes through the whole process. Even like the idea of, that as people that we live in this world, there's energy and vibrations and stuff like that. That if we're holding energy and vibrations then that's going to make us get weighed down with it. So he's saying resentment is the number one offender. From it stem hundreds of forms of spiritual disease. So if that's the number one problem, how do we get rid of resentment? When we're resentful at people, places, things, and situations, well, it's forgiveness. So if resentment is the number one offender, then forgiveness is going to be the number one tool, or the number one spiritual principle that we need to learn. And again, it's amazing how little that I was taught about it, how little I find other people know about it. Even in spiritual circles, I don't think that it's probably talked about enough. So that when you kind of question people about, have you realising the importance of it, that it's probably the number one principle that I need to learn in my life. It's probably been the number one thing that I needed to not just learn, but also apply. I've been a very sensitive person, a very hurt person, a very resentful person, a very angry person. And being resentful, being angry, being hurt means that you're going to need a lot of relief. And just to throw this in at this point, is like I was looking online this morning, I couldn't think of the name of the chemical, you know, like I was talking about energy or vibrations, but there's also chemicals involved in our experience as human beings. You know, they're called feelings, or, you know, feelings are made of peptides, and peptides dock onto receptors. And if you've been a really resentful person all your life, then you're really not going to have a lot of receptors that can deal with anything other than the peptides that you're producing that keep you in resentment, which and the chemicals called cortisol. That the people that are very resentful, they have very high levels of cortisol. Now, cortisol is a stress hormone. And if you've got high cortisol, you're going to have high anxiety. You're going to have high rate of heart disease. You're going to have more susceptible to chronic pain. You're going to be more susceptible to depression, more susceptible to addiction, more susceptible to all kinds of illnesses and things, you know, difficult in relationships, a grumpy person, a sensitive person, people who have to walk on eggshells around you. You know, this idea of resentment and unforgiveness has a massive impact on the human life. And so not being very good at forgiving, or not understanding that the importance of forgiving and how to do it, can cause not just mental and emotional problems and health problems, it can also cause a lot of misfortune in your life, and a lot of upset and a lot of damage, and a lot of dysfunction comes from the inability to forgive. And so I just wanted to lay that foundation, that probably the number one thing that everybody listening today should realise or take from this is, I really need to understand how to become a forgiving person on a very deep level if I want to live long and happy in this world. So forgiveness is way up there. Number one offender, resentment. Number one relief for people with addiction, forgiveness. We all got that. Right, so it is the big book's way of saying it. It says that, when we got to yesterday, it says, because again, obviously, when we're not forgiving, it really creates a very strong manifestation of self, which is the spiritual disease. So we're trying to be free from self. So we're considering its common manifestations, which resentment is the number one offender. Resentment is the number one common manifestation of this spiritual disease, this self. So we got through where it says, we looked at our list for it held the key. This is the bottom of page 66. We're prepared to look at the world from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and the people really dominated us in this state. The wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill, because the wrongdoing of others would make us resentful. We'd hold that resentment, and then hundreds of forms of spiritual disease. Look, just one resentment can cause hundreds of forms of spiritual disease. So we saw that these resentments must be mastered. Now it says also fancy and real, just to have a look at that for a minute. It's like, you know, a lot of the time when I actually went and made amends, a lot of the time people didn't even know I did anything wrong. Or when I told them what they did to me, they said, that's not what happened. So that was quite shocking, that I'd been, you know, really struggling for a lot of years with a problem that wasn't even real. But I just held that resentment and that fear. So it said that we saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So just wanting not to be resentful is just not going to make the grade. It's not going to cut the mustard. And so it says this was our cause. Now again, this is a contemplative meditation, and the more and more I go through the book, the more I realize that a lot of these solutions are contemplative meditation. It's asking us to do a contemplative meditation and then followed by a prayer, which makes kind of sense, doesn't it? Because like I said, as we go through the book, it keeps asking us to do the same thing, and it keeps narrowing the path as we start working this program and practicing it. As it starts becoming a working part of our mind, as it starts becoming clearer, what we start to learn is that we meditate contemplatively on whatever the situation is. We hold it in our mind. Then we ask God for the solution. We say a prayer in this part of our mind. And then we get the right course of action. And so that all kind of happens in that process where we meditate, we pray and we listen, and then the right answer comes, the right thought, the right action, and that becomes the process that we learn to start processing our problems. But again, you can include other people in that process. If it's not really become a working part of your mind, it's always good to go and talk to other people, but they're still becoming part of that process. It's about we're becoming conscious. We meditate, we pray, and that leads us to this conscious contact. It starts to reconnect us with this spirit, with this higher power that puts us on a higher thought plane, and then we live making better decisions. The sanity that we get is a very high level of sanity. So he's saying this was our course. We realized that the people who'd wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Now again, this is a practice. This is a practice that we should be practicing. And again, it matches up to the on awakenings. It's saying the same thing, that they were spiritually sick, though we did not like their symptoms and the way that they disturbed us, that they, like ourselves, was sick too. So again, you could say spiritually sick, that they're obviously disconnected, and we often say that, you know, like around these circles, that hurt people hurt people. So we're trying to gain this understanding of how to forgive. Again, it's not a one-time deal, and it's not just a simple process. It's something that we practice. He said, we ask God, again, this is a sorry, I can't think of the word. We ask God, it's actually an instruction, sorry, that this is giving us another instruction. And the instruction is we go into prayer again. That we retreat from this anger, we retreat from this negative judgment, that we stop and we say this person's sick, and then we go into prayer. Once we accept that, we go into the prayer, and the prayer is we ask God to help us, show them the same tolerance, pity and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Now that's a good prayer. That's a good prayer. That's a good prayer that says, God, help us, help me, and show me how to give this person's tolerance, patience, and pity. So that's something that we should actually stop and do and practice. Try it. It really does work well because it changes our mind. And that's what we're trying to do. We're going to change our life. We've got to change our mind. If we keep reacting in the old way, we're going to keep getting the same outcomes and nothing's going to change. So this program is offering a very simple way of changing your mind right on the front line of your life, right in the midst of the resentment, when you're losing consciousness and going into your conditioning, when you're starting to react in the same old way. It's saying, look, if you practice this, and it's giving you something to practice on the front line of your life, which again makes it even more fantastic to me. This is life becomes your teacher. And so it's saying that we wouldn't cheerfully treat a sick person that way. So it's trying to bring some understanding, which again is quite difficult when it's with a parent or somebody that's really hurt you. This is, the more they've hurt you and the wronger the offence or the larger the offence, the more difficult this could be. But the principle remains the same until you actually find this forgiveness. You are going to suffer whether the offence was done in the last 5 minutes or 40 years ago. You're going to continually suffer from that offence. So it says, when a person offended, we said to ourselves, again, this is an instruction and a contemplative meditation, that this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? And then back into a prayer. God save me from being angry. Again, this is saying I can't do this for myself. I need God's help. Like it said, we can't be free from self without God's help. So that's a great prayer. Even if you just boil it down to that one thing, when somebody's doing your head in, you can feel yourself shaking, you can feel your head going, to be able to get your mind to be able to say, God save me from being angry, thy will, not mine be done. Again, the more we practice that, it gets out of the lower mind and fire us straight on to that higher plane. But look, just to talk a little bit about forgiveness, is I kind of designed this story some years ago because, again, it's something that you get to talk about a lot. And the people that have been really abused or really hurt by their families or parents or other people, it can be quite a tall order to ask them to forgive, because again they don't always understand what that's really kind of meaning and what it said. So I sort of come up with this story to make it a little bit clearer, which I guess kind of like fits into that bit, and I call it the one shoe. I call it the one shoe, the story, the one shoe. And it's a story that says that, imagine that you're born with one shoe and everybody's born with this one perfect shoe. But to get your other shoe, that's the job of your family, the job of your family and your extended family and your community. And if they were completely perfect, that as you developed, that you would get a shoe that matches the one that you were born with, and you'd have these two perfect shoes. And as you walk through life, when you come to a cold patch in your life, because we all come to cold patches, but you've got your shoes on and you walk through it, and even though it's not completely comfortable, it's not too bad because you got your one shoe, and when you got your 2 shoes, when you come to a gravelly patch in life and you walk across the gravel and it's a bit crunchy and a bit slippery, but you know, you got your 2 shoes on and you get through it and you're doing all right. And when you come to a wet patch or a hot patch or with glass or whatever life can throw at you, if you got your 2 shoes, you tend to be able to have the ability to get through it in a pretty reasonable manner and maybe even learn something. But with the people that tend to come to me that I tell them this story, they kind of, their story is, oh, I got my sock gets wet, I got holes in my sock, the gravel keeps sticking in my foot, I've got a limp and life's really difficult, what's wrong with me? And it's like, oh man, look, you've only got 1 shoe. And they're like, where am I meant to get the other shoe from? And you go, well, you're meant to get it from your mum and dad and your extended family and your community. Oh, I knew it was their fault. I knew it was their fault. And it's like, well, yeah, but kind of. But hang on a minute. Look, have you got a family photograph? Can you pull up a family photograph in your head from when you were young, and you can see all your family, maybe at a wedding or a party? Look at that photograph in your head. Now, the question I'm going to ask is, how many of them people would you say in your family have got 2 shoes? Now, most people go, you know what? They probably none of them really. They probably were all pretty dysfunctional. And then you go, well, but have a look at the shoe on their foot. And you might see their foot with a little bit of leather flapped over it, bit of sellotape, bit of duct tape. And I go, mate, look, isn't it funny though that shoe on your mum's foot, that shoe on your dad's foot, you kind of can see that's kind of is on your foot. They have given you what they got, but they ain't got 2 shoes. And then people go, you're right, I can see that they're spiritually sick too, that they haven't got 2 shoes. And it's like, well, you have to forgive them then, don't you? And they go, yeah, you know what? Under them circumstances, now I see it, I can forgive them. And then I say, what's the problem? And they go, well, there ain't one, is there? I said, yes, there is. You still only got 1 bloody shoe. See, forgiving people forgiving your parents doesn't make them functional. Forgiving your parents doesn't make you functional. See, forgiveness doesn't change much. Well, it does in the sense of this. Forgiveness is the doorway to healing. See, forgiveness, when you actually forgive, it doesn't change what happened. And what happened isn't right a lot of the time. It says that back. It says that the world and the people are quite often wrong. And your parents were probably wrong based on the fact that they've only got 1 shoe, which doesn't make it right. So you're not, when you're forgiving them, you're not saying what they did was right. Nobody's saying that. But what it's saying is if you don't forgive them, you're going to continue to suffer for that wrong, for that hurt, for that offence, from that debt, from that sin. So forgiveness can give you instant relief from that pain. And from that place of relief, then you can look at, well, what can we do about it? So for me, forgiveness, one of the greatest things is that when I actually understand it and learn to give it, it takes away the pain straight away. Doesn't take away the problem. That's something that may need some work. But then you can start dealing with people of a place of, look, hurt people hurt people. So when I'm not hurt, I can help people. And that's what it's saying. We ask God to show them the same tolerance, pity and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick person. How can I be helpful? Helpful? Did he say that? Oh, yes, he did. Hang on a minute, I thought this was about me. What do you mean be helpful? How can I be helpful? Why should I be helpful? I wanted them punished a minute ago. I'll forgive them, but I don't know about being helpful. It says, God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. God's will, God's thinking will be done. Now, God's thinking is always love. God's thinking, God's will is always love. Because God is love. Now, the reason that we're all hurt and twisted and our perception of reality is twisted and we're all screwed up because we didn't feel loved or cared for. So you're not going to be able to tell me a resentment that you have that doesn't come down to this. They didn't love me. Their actions didn't love me. They said they loved me, but they didn't buy me a cowboy suit on my 7th birthday or worse. They didn't love me. And so whenever we're having a go at anyone and telling them how they hurt us and what they did, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get love. Because we deserve love. We all deserve love, and we all should have been loved. But whatever's put this twist in the world, and that's another story, and what's denied our parents and maybe their parents and their parents and their parents the ability to love the children, I'm sure, in the way that they would have wanted to if they had the 2 shoes, that we would have been loved. And we should have been given love. And again, that's what today's kind of about. The Christian calendar is today, the sacrifice, the sacrifice of Christ is about God giving love, bringing forgiveness back into the world and bringing love and saying, look, I love you. I want you to come back to me. But instead, we carry that on ourselves, or we start demanding because we're trying to get love. We all grow up trying to get it. And really, what this is saying is, look, you've got to start giving it. You ain't going to get it the way you're trying to get it. Because every time you're angry and demanding from your parents, no matter what you're saying to your parents, whenever you're angry at them, all that you're really saying is, love me, care about me. Why don't you care about me? And they're like, I don't know. I'm giving you everything I've got. And so it's saying here, this is where it's going to turn around. This is like the turnaround. And you'll find that as you go through this program, that it starts to turn us around. It's like, I like the word devil backwards is lived, or evil is live. It's like, we've got to turn around. You've got to stop the destruction and start getting on board with the creation. Because it says love, which is God, is for giving. Love is for giving. So you're not going to get it unless you start learning to give it. But people that have so much offense and so much hurt, who become selfish and self-centered and self-seeking, they're always looking to get. And that's the thing with alcoholics and addicts, that we become the most selfish people on planet Earth. And I'm sure all our families say that. Yet all the relationships that we want, we're going to have to learn to give. So we can see why this is a spiritual program, because it's altruistic. It says that I'm not going to, feel good about myself until I start giving. And that's kind of like the step 12, is having had a spiritual awakening, which is I become free from self, because selfish people don't give, they don't think about other people, they don't care about other people. So the spiritual awakening is when I become free from self. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, the result is I become free from self, that we then carry this message to other alcoholics. It used to say other people, but they took that a bit out. Other alcoholics, we carry this to other people. And I used to say this, look, I used to help people to get out of myself. That's what they taught me in the beginning. They would say, look, if you go and help somebody, it'll get you out of self. And they kind of call that two-stepping, where we help people, we don't drink, and we go and help people. And it says this is a blissful state, but it's still coming from a selfish place. I'm getting relief for myself. You know, it's kind of a funny thing, isn't it? That when we say, oh, you know, like you see somebody in a wheelchair, I felt so grateful, but it's kind of a sick thing, isn't it, to go down the hospital and stand there looking at all the damaged people to make yourself feel grateful. But what I learned is that when I worked the steps and started to break down myself, then the result of that was something in me wanted to help other people. So I used to say, look, I used to help people to get out of self, but now I help people because I'm out of self. And there's a very big difference, because the first one, you don't actually develop spiritually because it's selfish, and you don't develop spiritually if you're being selfish. So even like Adam was doing the talk last week on selfish amends, there may be some relief, but you're not going to develop spiritually. You're not going to develop relationships. And this Saturday, Sonia's going to do a talk on creative amends, that we can look at how to be not so selfish in that, reaching out and helping other people. And so that's kind of like the sign in us that as we start reaching out to help other people because we're becoming free from self, that love in us that we're looking, that we want to get, we discover love is forgiving, we start to give love. And guess what? When we start to give love, it generally starts to come back. So as we give it, it kind of comes back. As we're trying to get it, it doesn't come back. And you may be the first person in your life that's ever going to love your mum. Maybe she wasn't loved properly, and maybe you keep thinking that, you know, that she should love you and keep hammering at you and making her feel worse about herself, or your dad, or your whoever. That maybe they've not been loved, and that maybe they've been trying to get it, and maybe when you give it freely to them, that maybe you start actually, it says that's how we then start becoming of service to them. That's when how we help them. And that develops it in us, because as we start giving it, we start getting it. And so it's a very important thing to learn. And I think maybe I'm going to put together a little half a day or maybe even a day Zoom workshop just focused on forgiveness, because again, there's a lot more could be said about it. I'm trying to just give it in the most simple way, because it is a very profound thing to start learning to do right now. And then as we go on in the big book on 67, again, it gives us some more directions that we should follow. It says we avoid retaliation and argument, and that's, again, that's something that needs to be practiced. That's not a one-time deal, but that's something that we should practice. It says we wouldn't treat sick people that way. It said if we do, we destroy our chances of being helpful. There I go again, being helpful to them. What it was about me. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view to each and every one. And then it talks about referring back to our list, putting out the minds the wrongs others have done. See, it's also learning this process that as we go on, because really once we've talked about forgiveness, we should look at judgment. Because how much do we judge each other? How much do we judge ourselves? You know, there's also a forgiveness of self and a forgiveness of God. And this, you know, it's really is a wonderful journey to go on. And the more forgiveness we can find. Look, if you've got a lot of stress in your life, it's probably because you're very judgmental and very unforgiving. That's a highly toxic mental state that's going to make you ill, it's going to make you unhappy. You know, God, if the whole world learned this, I'm sure the A&E and antidepressants would start dropping. I'm sure all kinds of illnesses would stop happening. I'm sure lots of cancers would start disappearing. So if you've got a lot of anxiety or you feel a lot of panic, it's probably because you're not very good at forgiving. Now, that's not a judgment. Again, it's something that we need to learn that we've probably not been taught. And by doing this, it's saying, you know, look, I wanted to be forgiving. I've just not always known how to do it, and I'm still learning better ways of doing it. It's not an easy thing to do, but I need to learn it because I suffer from resentment otherwise. So if you've got a lot of anxiety and depression and fears, and you're a bit prickly, it's something that you need to focus on and learn about this forgiveness. Now, finish on this, that I like this. I was also having a quick look this morning, and I like this about Nelson Mandela. That, you know, he was pretty badly treated for 30 years, but one of the first things he said, that when he come out of that jail, as soon as he walked through them doors that were leading him to freedom, and again, we've got our doors here, we've got this arch that we walk through, but when we get this relationship right, when we come walking out of addiction, the jail of addiction, the bondage of self that we've been living in, as he come walking out of that jail, it says that he said to himself, I'm going to leave my resentment in this jail. Because when I cross that threshold out into my freedom, if I don't leave this resentment in this jail, then I'm going to remain in jail. And I think that's pretty much where I'm going to leave it. It's dead on 12:01. So I'm going to leave that there for today.